Frankl wrote about. If you're raised with might makes right, authoritarianism, adults could lose their voice to a tyrannical, hate-filled Fuhrer, to obey, to carry out the unspeakable, cruel orders that Frankl's memoir bears witness to. You can learn a lot about Alice Miller. You can Google her. There's all kinds of blogs that reference her. She's written several other books. But if you're interested in knowing more about the path that she pursued, there's plenty out there to discover. So today we've largely abandoned this method, I just need to say, of child rearing, though I bet some of us that were raised in the 50s and 60s could tell some stories. Right, I see some heads nodding. Even my brother's 10 years younger than I am, we were talking about this not recently, but he went to public school, went to Harley Hopkins Elementary School. He's a big chatterbox, very loquacious human being. And he remembers being deeply humiliated in 6th grade by a teacher who duct taped his mouth and made him sit there, uncomfortable with tears in his eyes. I mean, like I said, those of us raised in the 50s and 60s have stories to tell. As I'm sure as me as the parent of 2 Gen Xers and 1 millennial, I know they have their own stories too, from let's call it the self-esteem movement that encouraged methods to build up a child's voice by giving honors and citations for pretty much everything. Right? So I'm wondering how many of you have read Bishop Marianne's book, Learning How We Learn to Be Brave? That's good. I just started. Yeah, I really commend it to you. Why? Because it's nourishment for adults looking for food on how to turn up the volume of our own voices. And she does it, as those of you who've read it know, by telling her own stories and stories of people that she knows, even some stories of some people at St. John the Baptist, where she was the rector for 18 years, something like that. So Rod Hardy's story is in there if you know Rod. In chapter 5, it's called Stepping Up to the Plate. She describes a baseball player who's been at batting practice for months and months and months. And although baseball is a team sport, stepping up to the plate is an action of one person, right? It's easy to understand, she writes, how the phrase stepping up to the plate has become a metaphor to describe those moments when an individual takes the initiative to do what needs to be done. And of course, she did that how many years ago now, when she went down to St. John's Church and just really protested the way in which an Episcopal church was being used. So, how do we prepare for a time when you and I might be called to step up to the plate? Her book is full of those kinds of stories, and I commend it to you. So Craig today asked me to consider the work of Edwin Friedman with you this morning. Are you familiar with Edwin Friedman? See some heads nodding. By the way, Marianne was a disciple of Edwin Friedman. She went to he used to have classes, I guess, that were where you would go and sit with him for, I don't remember precisely, but she would go regularly, maybe once or twice a year, and participate in classes with him in which she was encouraging people on matters of leadership by looking at their own life. He was a pulpit rabbi in Washington, D.C. for many years. He studied the systems theory of psychology, and he went on to practice therapy after leaving the pulpit rabbi side of his life from a family systems point of view. And that point of view is when each member's actions impact the whole, right? It's not just one person. It's where are you in this matrix of your family life? And it's a perspective that emphasizes relationships, dynamics of a family, for example, over individual problems. Friedman wrote, he led seminars like the one Marianne went to. He came here, when was that, in the early 80s for a couple of clergy conferences. His last book was, let's see, let's back up here. He died an untimely death, unexpected death in 1996. He was in the midst of writing his last book when he died, but his family and colleagues pulled his notes together and published it in 2027. And this is the book in your Kohi. People are reading it. I know, well, it used to be required reading for seminarians. Things have changed so much. I don't know if it is, but probably. There are a lot of people, myself included, a lot of clergy that try and read this about once a year, just for nourishment and encouragement in matters of leadership. So his book is a response to what he believed is a crisis of leadership in our anxious world, a crisis that he called a failure of nerve, right? A failure, he probably would say, to step up to the plate. He was fiercely critical of organizations that adapt around the most dependent members, the most anxious, the most uncooperative, rather than adapting around the energetic, the visionary, the imaginative, and the motivated. Now, he would also say that his book, his point of view is for everyone who's in a leadership position, whether you're a rector, a rabbi, a politician, a teacher in a classroom, a parent of a family, a CEO, an educator, a healer, or a manager. He argues for strength and for self-differentiation as marks of effective leadership, for more maturity, not more data, which we're of course flooded with right now, for stamina, not technique, and for personal responsibility, not more empathy, which I find particularly challenging in a religious community because part of who we want to be is caring people. And so we're kind of socialized, you might say, in a religious community to be empathetic. But when does empathy, I see you nodding your head, when does empathy actually prevent us from being strong and caring and healthy people? Let's talk a little bit about a word that he uses a lot, self-differentiation. What does that mean? He emphasizes the importance of a well-differentiated leader. Like I said, whether you're a president or a parent. He was a student of family systems theory founder, Dr. Murray Bowen. So let's see how Bowen first defines a self-differentiated leader. Again, just trying to hit the core of this. It's also another really large topic. So Bowen would say to self-define or self-differentiate is to set apart oneself as distinct from others. It is the ability for a person to recognize their own thoughts, their own feelings, and to respect that they are sometimes different from others. It's a person's ability to be confident and comfortable with oneself, even if they differ from their loved ones. A well-differentiated leader has a strong sense of self and can effectively separate while, and this is a really important part of this, while remaining connected. So I have to tell you what this reminds me of. for Episcopalians. Just, when would this have been? It was during the bishop search, when Bishop Sean Rowe, this is obviously before he became our presiding bishop, he gave a lecture at Virginia Seminary that kind of went around, kind of viral, and anyway, I watched it and listened to the whole thing. And at the end of this lecture, I remember I was sitting down at my front of my home computer, and I just about jumped off my seat. It's like, oh my God, that's exactly what we need. Because he said, we Episcopalians need to learn how to have fierce conversations among us. Fierce conversations in spiritual and psychological safety. I have to tell you, at that time, we were at a time in our diocese when it wasn't particularly safe to have fierce conversations. Clergy might be taken to what I used to call the clergy woodshed. You know, and it just wasn't. And so for him to say that just really struck home to me, and it strikes home to me in the context of this whole conversation of how do we learn to have a voice? How do we learn to have a voice in our families, in our work, in our classrooms, but also here in our faith community. We Episcopalians need to learn how to have fierce conversations among us in spiritual and psychological safety. No one's going to shun you. No one's going to, kick you out. No one's going to humiliate you. That's among the things that I would say are spiritual and psychological safety. Some people call these courageous conversations. You heard that term? I think courageous conversations. The kind of conversations we can have in environments of trust and respect. So right now, today, my ministry in the diocese has changed. I am retired, but I like to stay busy and connected. And one of the things that I do is I'm a ministry companion, which you may not have heard about that because you don't need a ministry companion. But ministry companions are, I don't know, maybe 8 of us. And we are deployed, you might say, to congregations that are stuck in one way or another. They're having internal conflicts where they just can't get unstuck. Maybe they have some really serious financial issues that they have to look at. Maybe it's about their building, maybe it's loss of membership, some of the things that we've been reading about just in general for the Christian church in the United States. And one of the things that I feel is most important for me to do as a ministry companion is to work with people to help find their voices. Right? Like what is it that's really going on here? Sometimes there are voices that are really loud and intimidating and kind of tamp down other voices. So that question I said I live with, what would your voice say if you let it speak, can be important when there's so much emotional thank you, going on, particularly if a congregation is looking like it might need to leave its building. So when creating an atmosphere of spiritual and psychological safety, I found brings relief amongst in congregations, especially in vestry members, when they're able to voice what they really think, what they really feel, be it grief or anger or hopelessness. It helps us be able to move on. So let me just stop here and find out what's going on with you as I say some of these things before I continue. What comes to mind as we talk about? Was anyone going to say anything, or what would your voice say? insights you have from Viktor Frankl? Yes.
My mother was a young adult during the Second World War, and I tried to engage her many times over the course of her life about that experience and about the Holocaust.
Mhm.
And her answer was always the same. We didn't know. And now here we are in the information age, and I can't stand to watch the news. And so I'm willfully ignorant about a lot of things that are happening. It's painful to watch the news, and I don't know what to do about that.
Anybody else feel like that?
Yeah.
Right?
I think another thing though is, yesterday there was a rally at the Capitol for Ukraine.
Uh-huh.
You won't see anything in any of the media about it. And I think it's not just us being silent, it's media is no longer reporting on the fact that people are actually showing up and speaking out.
Mhm. Jen, and then I want to get back to you. Go ahead, Jen.
Because they're threatening. I've listened to several interviews from people from the media, including New York Times. It's shocking
Mhm.
how strong they feel. But growing up, I think respect for authority and not challenging within a family, but also at church was really strong. I had uncles who both served in World War II. One was killed, and it was my other uncle came home, and he was in his 60s before he spoke the first word about the war.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Ursula Heggie is an author that I like. She lived her first 18 years in Germany. Her first book was Stones from the River.
Oh, right, I remember that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
she's written several.
Yes,
That's part of my stack on the
Right.
bedside table. She's wonderful.
right.
She didn't know. She watched her friends come and go.
Pat, thank you. And back to your question. You know, there was actually a time in my life, it's a while ago now, when I just kind of dove deeply into Holocaust studies. And I forgot the man's name, is a professor at the U, his first name is Bob. But he did research on church newsletters during the war. And from particularly across the mainline church, and researched the countless number of letters that were published from rabbis in Europe. Help us, this is what's happening to us. And his feeling was, if my memory is remembering this correctly, the title of his research was called So It Was True. And he believed that people they froze. They didn't know what to do with it. It was too overwhelming. It can't be true. It can't be, I mean, you all know that. It can't be true. This is what we're hearing. But he would say, and others would say, not to say your mom wasn't telling the truth. I don't mean to say that at all. But just like those people that turned away when cattle cars went through their small towns, they knew. They didn't know what to do, or they knew if they did do something, they'd be in that cattle car too. So now I feel the same way. I'm trying to wean myself off the news, and it's hard because I feel like I want to understand how I can resist some of the things that are happening. And if I don't know, how can I resist? So some of you know, one of the things that I've been deeply involved in is immigrant justice. So how can I know how to push back if I don't read these stories about what's happening at home and might happen to some people that I care about here?
No, I was just gonna say that I met Bob in New York. I don't remember his last name either. But I had read his book, and I mean, publications like the New York Times put stories in the back. And so when papers like that don't even have the courage to put it on the front page.
Mhm.
It doesn't help those of us who don't read far enough into the.
Cynthia, are you talking about then during World War II?
No, no,
Or are you
this was-
talking now?
This was like 20 years ago,
Uh-huh,
when I,
okay,
or longer actually, but
okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Well, there were stories, I mean, I've read biographies where, there were people who came to Roosevelt during World War II, telling him about this. And I think it was just too shocking for anybody to believe, A, and B, the kind of action you would have to take about something like that. I mean, I think it was just overwhelming and frightening, considering what was all of the stress that was going on during the war in any case. Doesn't make it any better, but I mean, I think it's easier to understand, given what was happening.
yeah, when we're overwhelmed by so many things, it can take our voices away.
The other thing I would say about the news, I find that watching the news on TV is much more emotionally disturbing than reading about it in the newspaper or in a magazine. And not only that, you can read through it much more quickly than it takes to take place in real time during watching TV. So my way of getting some distance from that is reading about it afterwards, or not watching it in real time, and it gives an emotional distance that at least I find is helpful.
Yeah, let's do Linda and then, yeah.
Many of you know I'm from Canada, and last Sunday I was glued to streaming media because it was the leadership convention where they chose a new prime minister.
Right.
And there were three major speeches that I was just overwhelmed by, because each of those speakers, one had been prime minister in the 70s, one was Trudeau, one is the new one, Carney. Each of them did the Canadian issues in the context of their talk. And then they said, and Mr. Trump, and they went down the line of grievances, whatever, strong statements. And I thought, finally, I'm hearing somebody put words to what is around my table in conversations in hallways. And I think we don't feel safe doing that down here in a public way. Whereas in Canada, they're speaking for their sovereignty.
Right,
I mean, there's no bigger insult
right,
than what is occurring there
right,
now.
51st state,
I mean, you
Yeah.
can't imagine how that would,
yeah,
how that's going over there.
right,
But across the border, it's a safety issue. I know my son is teaching at the university now, and he teaches 3 classes of students in urban studies. I said, how are you handling this? And he said, he lets the students talk to each other. And so it gives them voice, and, I haven't asked him this week. That was his answer a couple of weeks
Yeah.
ago. This is the most disturbing time. Yeah.
Susan, given the example that Bishop Buddy provided right after the inauguration, are you aware of actions or gatherings or organizing that's occurring within the Episcopal Church in our country, in our state, in our country, that we could, as individuals, join with in resisting?
Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is Episcopal Migration Ministry. I mean, they have been settling refugees for, I don't know how many decades, It's a
Since
long
the
time.
80s. We were involved in the
Since the
80s.
80s. at
Since the
least.
eighties.
Yeah, I think before then even.
Yeah.
more, yeah.
And they lost millions in federal funding, had to lay off
30 million.
$30 million. Yep.
The Council of Churches here too.
Council of Churches is one of their
I know, yeah,
there's a word for it,
there is.
the Minnesota Council of Churches, I think Lutheran Social Services, the,
Catholic Charities,
Catholic Charities and the Immigration Institute, the one by the,
International Institute.
International Institute, the one by the fairgrounds are in that network. So nevertheless, they are continuing to put out really, really good information about how to continue to support asylum seekers, refugees, people here on temporary protected status, that whole, bucket load of people, so that you could just, Google, Episcopal Migration Ministries, and do you get the, gosh, what's it called? The daily scan, the one that comes out every day with news, across the Episcopal Church, headlines that are, anyway, if you get that, now think of it if you ask me afterwards. They also publish daily things that are happening within the Episcopal Church. There's an Episcopal Public Policy Network, that sends out news. So, yes,
Okay,
and
thank you.
I'm sorry to be so vague here, but yes, and for sure, the Episcopal Migration Ministries is among the ones that are continuing to promote education of what we can do to help support our neighbors. So, yes, thank you for that question.
Could I mention?
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
so this Friday, the Episcopal Church has a Zoom session. That what can you do now, how to engage in advocacy in this moment?
There you go.
And I can forward that to maybe the church and the church.
Send it to me and I'll
Okay,
work on it.
and I'm registered for it.
And who is
It's the
sponsoring it?
Episcopal Church on a national level, so it's not local, it's national. And there was I don't have it connected to my phone here, but there was also a packet of information.
Okay.
And I didn't get a chance to go through and read it yet. But I think, I've never seen the Episcopal Church put something like, but what do I know? But I've never seen an Episcopal Church put something like this out,
Mhm.
and I thought, yes.
Yes.
Betsy, could you send that to Lynn so she could send to the women's group?
Yeah,
Sure.
good, thank you.
And the other thing I just wanna talk about too is how we can connect with other people. And my focus is really Minnesota. Not just the Twin Cities, because we know how the Twin Cities is, but to affect Minnesota as a whole, you have to have the whole state. And you have to be willing to have those courageous conversations with everybody. There's a group called something like, it's a Facebook group called something like Undoing White Nationalism or Christian Nationalism, and there's a Minnesota chapter. And I had a Zoom meeting with some people on Friday. About 2 weeks ago, I threw out the link to God and Country, which is a documentary on what's going on in the church, Christian nationalism, and encourage people to have a conversation, like a book club kind of talk afterwards.
Yeah.
And I had 4 people sign up do it, and it was a tremendous experience. And they wanted to continue that, and so Catherine Stewart is coming to town in May. And her book that's out is called Money, Lies, and God. And if you want to know what's really going on right now in the political spectrum, read that book. And so she's coming to town, so you can register to go there in person and hear her. And then we're going to try to get another discussion going on to add, just keep bringing more people in.
So
So-
talk to Betsy afterwards if you're
Yeah.
interested in getting linked into it.
So it's educating, and then,
Yeah.
and what we talked about last Friday was really about centering ourselves, like you're talking about, what's our voice? What, where are we?
Yeah.
And we all shared like personal experiences that we were having. not about what we were reading in the news, but personal experiences that we were having, and how do we respond? Yeah.
Thank you for that, because that's actually how I wanted to bring this conversation down is, you know, back to the beginning. We're in the midst of this season now, self-examination and repentance. And I would encourage you to add this dimension of where is my voice? And what, you know, following Rabbi Friedman's direction, what feeds your voice? What turns up the volume on your voice? And then what takes it away? And I agree, sometimes an overwhelm of news, of really hard daily, multiple times a day news can take away our voice. Jared.
Two thoughts really quickly. One is we've talked in years past about a figure that's largely lost to time, Elizabeth Schmitz, who was a theologian who didn't have a lot of higher degrees, who lobbied Niemöller, Barth, and Bonhoeffer for a long time about the need for the church to speak up in support of the Jews, long before any of them got public about it. And in fact, if you follow Diana Butler Bass, a very lovely, edifying source of information in this time, she talked about the Niemöller moment, not the Bonhoeffer moment, because Niemöller, we all know, had a conversion, really. He was a nationalist who supported Hitler. And so he changed. And I think the power of advocates like Schmitz, who are voices, we don't even know her full story. It's only now being rediscovered, persistent and in the background, was really important. And we tend to tell the stories of Niemöller, Barth, and Bonhoeffer, who later got on the bandwagon. And I think it's important to do that in part because the question we're wrestling with is about the news and about how demoralizing we can feel. I think one of the things we can do is not to absent ourselves from the news, but to balance it with truth. Because the news is reporting to us a narrative. It's not spinning it, sometimes it is, but is telling us a narrative spoken by the world. And so often as Christians, we can enter into that dialogue as though the way it's been framed is the way we must engage it. And in fact, the witness of saints like Schmitz and later Niemöller and Bonhoeffer and so many others tell us, no, there is a Christian response. And the Gospels themselves, like read the Gospels in equal measure to the news. Read the saints in equal measure to the news. Like equip yourself. Because the news will not equip you. It will inform you.
Right. And, you know, back in the day, kids and others were wearing, what would Jesus do, you know, bracelets.
Right.
I'll tell you, to me, that's still a very, very valid question. What would Jesus do? Jesus, who lived in a time of intense oppression under the boot of the most powerful empire in the world. And stood up to power over and over and over again. So, you know, leaving you with this question about, you know, what emboldens you, what holds you back, who can you talk to about this? How can you gather with those who will listen? One of the things that I've heard Bishop Loya say over and over again is, I love you enough to tell you the truth. I'm also a trustee, and he'll frequently say that to the trustees. Or he'll talk about how he said that to other congregations, and I found myself saying this too. In the name of love, I tell you the truth. In the name of love, I ask you to observe your resistance to reality. So, anybody else want to? Yeah.
I just wanted to mention Bishop Loya.
Yeah.
And his weekly letters.
Yes. This
And
morning.
the fact that the information that Betsy just referred to was referred to in one of his weekly letters. You have to scroll down, you have to get the whole thing. And is it Kelsey?
Yeah, that's his class.
She made reference to what you're talking about. It's happening on Friday, and I noted it on my calendar. So I think we should appreciate that we're at least prompted to recognize that the leadership in our state is talking about.
Yes, yeah. Well, Bishop Loy is for sure, and he is creating an environment where people can use their voice, they can disagree, even within the trustees. We've had some real, no, I don't think that's true, why not? Well, because, I mean, when I first came on the trustees, it wasn't like that, it is like that now. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that one of the problems a lot of families have is that they're divided families. And it's really, at least some of the time, it's really questioning myself about how is it that I speak when I'm in the same room as, and maintain the relationship. And it's very,
How have you done that?
we avoid the topics. I mean, and I really like them, but I'm not saying that I think that's really satisfactory because it doesn't get either of us anywhere. So, even finding my voice and my own courage in those relationships is so significant. It would be significant. And I think it would, something that would differ from person to person in their own situation, but I'm very aware of it and still struggling, with how to do it well.
Anybody else have that situation where you've got differences in your family?
Actually, on my side of the family, my two remaining brothers. My youngest brother is a Teamster, and it's great talking to him. My oldest brother is also, we're very much in keeping with each other, except that he's a retired school administrator who retired just before they started burning books in Kansas. And his solution to everything is, oh, he's an idiot. And that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah, doesn't go anywhere. No.
That's how we got where we are
Right.
now.
Right. Well, for me today, this huge lesson from Frankl is bearing witness to a culture, to a country that lost its voice pretty darn quickly, right? Can't overstate the disastrous results. And we're seeing, we're kind of at the foothills of some of this stuff. Of people being afraid to speak out, of people who represent us being afraid to speak out. And so, and I heard Governor Walz say recently, it's up to us to speak out. And how are we gonna do that? And how can we support each other to doing that? Let me close, unless someone has something else they'd like to offer. And anybody else have before I close, want to speak about dividedness in your own family and how you're navigating that? So I want to close with this. In his Nobel Prize recognition speech in 1965, Martin Luther King delivered two sentences. If you have heard this. He said this: history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and indifference of the good people. Our generation will have to repent not only for the words and acts of the children of darkness, but also for the fears and apathy of the children of light.